Welcome to everybody gathered here today and to all of our online friends and supporters. Thank you so much for being here. Today we continue our last part of a three-part discussion on Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus' inner Halakah, or inner teachings for purifying the mind and heart, making us pure so that we could be reborn spiritually rebirthed, or receive the birth from above, which is a more advanced initiation than what modern churches call baptism. Baptism in this tradition is a sacrament for entry into discipleship with Mar Yeshua. But it's just the beginning. It's not for removing sins or forgiveness of sins or removing of original sin, any of that kind of stuff. The mikvah of John, the baptism of John, which Mar Yeshua continued after the beheading of St. John the Baptist, the mikvah is a Jewish tradition of cleansing oneself to prepare for the return of God's Malkuth, often translated as the kingdom of God coming to earth. But that's not accurate. Malkuth is God's sovereignty, his kingship. But Malkuth is not a king domain. It's not a place outside of ourselves. It's actually a reality within our hearts. It's God consciousness, if you will. Sovereignty of God. Kingship of God. Rulership of God. Inner guidance of God. And that baptism was meant to say, yes, I want to step onto this path. I want to seriously dedicate myself to Mar Yeshua's Halakah, his teachings. In the last 2 weeks before this, we talked about the inner Halakah in 2 steps because it takes some time to discuss. And today we're going to discuss the last part, which actually merges the inner Halakah with the so-called secret Halakah. Secret because it's very within and it's very hidden. And they would be teachings that a spiritual master would give to serious disciples, those who show up regularly, that are practicing, that the master can see that there are some changes within the personality, within the emotional reactivity of a disciple. And then such a spiritual master might give deeper, hidden teachings that are appropriate for close disciples. Let's look at the final segment on the inner Halakah of Mar Yeshua. So I titled this talk, Where Inner Halakah Merges into Secret Halakah. And it's not secret because it's special, or only for a few. It's secret for those that are serious about the spiritual path. And that's different from being secret because we're special. Nobody is special, and everybody is special. If a soul is special, it's because it is a child of God. It is a child of the Abba, of the Father, Mother, God, which emanated us in all of creation. So, secret does not imply special or different or separate or higher than anybody else. Secret only means that Mar Yeshua, or one of his descendants through apostolic succession, would give you something that's hidden from the masses, hidden from people that are just window shoppers of spirituality. Such a spiritual master or a teacher in apostolic succession may give different teachings to serious students that are showing up, that have shown some spiritual maturity and spiritual growth, and we'll talk about such secret Halakah next week and possibly the week following, depending on how much time that may take us. So today we're going to talk about one logion, one section of teaching from the Gospel of Thomas, which is coming from Logion 22b. Here, it says, his disciples asked, Mar Yeshua's disciples asked, then shall we, being spiritually newly begotten ones, attain the sovereignty, the Malkuth. Yeshua replied, when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single unity, so that the male may not be merely masculine, and the female merely feminine, and when you make human eyes to serve as God's eye, and a human hand to serve as God's hand, and a human foot to serve as God's foot, and a human image to serve as the divine image, then you shall attain the sovereignty, the Malkuth. Let's read through this one more time together and then break it down into parts and what it means. His disciples asked, then shall we, being spiritually newly begotten ones, attain the sovereignty, Malkuth? Yeshua replied, when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single unity, so that the male will not be merely masculine, and the feminine merely feminine, and when you make human eyes to serve as God's eye, and a human hand to serve as God's hand, and a human foot to serve as God's foot, and a human image to serve as the divine image, then you shall attain the sovereignty. This is the point in which inner Halakah merges and becomes secret or inner Halakah. Before Mar Yeshua would have given his most secret, innermost Halakah to his close circle of inner circle of disciples, he would have been looking that such a disciple, ready for secret teachings, would have accomplished all of these things or been well on the way to accomplishing these things outlined in Gospel of Thomas, Logian 22b. So some terms to understand. Newly begotten ones. The first verse says, when we will become newly begotten ones. In other words, these disciples are talking with their master, and they've not yet attained the status of spiritual rebirth. Spiritual rebirth is what it means to be a newly begotten one. A yeled, like a child, or like yeledim, children. Mar Yeshua compared spiritual rebirth, the initiation of spiritual rebirth, the ultimate spiritual initiation of rebirth, as the state of a child's mind. Because a child is purely loving. They're usually not manipulative. Usually what you see is what you get, whether they're happy or angry. Their hearts are innocent. They're spontaneous. They're in awe all the time of God's creation. Everything is always new. Nothing is boring. Nothing is below them. Everything is an exciting new day. And that's what it's like to be a perfected saint or a perfected master. Ever new consciousness, ever new perceptions, ever new desire to serve God, humanity, and creation. So to become a newly begotten one is to be spiritually rebirthed. As it says in Greek in the Gospel of John, spiritual rebirth really means in Greek, the birth from above. And this is an advanced spiritual initiation Mar Yeshua gave to his disciples. It was not baptism. This was a culmination, the final blessing of God, or Mar Yeshua, which liberated the soul from incurred debt to God, to the earth, to humanity. And when one was spiritually reborn or became a newly begotten one, at the same time, the Malkuth would fully blossom in their spiritual heart, their Leib. Malkuth is often mistranslated as kingdom, as we've already said, but is more accurately God's rulership, sovereignty, kingship, or inner guidance in the heart of a perfected being. And of course, before we're fully perfected, we have the Malkuth growing from a small mustard seed, slowly over time into a huge mustard tree or mustard bush that can give refuge to all beings, as Yeshua had the Malkuth fully developed in himself. And he's been a refuge for billions of people over the millennia. The Malkuth could not be a kingdom that is an outward place, because Jesus says the Malkuth is within. It's within you. So an outward kingdom obviously can't be built of mortar and wood and cement inside our hearts. That phrase alone shows that kingdom could not be an outward place. Rather, Malkuth is God's sovereignty or his ruleship. He's the king on the throne of your heart, the queen on the throne of your heart. Because the Malkuth, the sovereignty of God, is within. Entos. Entos is the Greek word for within, used in the Bible, in the Christian Testament. So, when you truly become initiated to the grace of God, to the grace of Yeshua, in the spiritual rebirth, and you become a newly begotten one, at that time, the Malkuth has fully flourished and manifested itself within your spiritual heart. And that Malkuth can also be defined as the inner guidance of God, in which you know from within your heart the right steps to take, not only for yourself, but for others that seek your help. For the earth, for humanity as a whole, your heart becomes a cell phone able to connect to God. Make the inner as the outer. When you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, then you shall attain the sovereignty. This is referring to the idea of being double-souled or double-minded, which we've talked about several weeks back. The Greek word is dipsychion. Pardon me, my Greek is not good. But there's the Greek word on the screen for you. It means double-souled or double-minded. And what this refers to is the two yetzers, the inclinations or impulses put within the human heart at the time of incarnation. In Genesis, there are two yods and yetzer. And those two Y's have been Kabbalistically interpreted as the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination of the heart, and Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination of the heart. And constantly we have to choose between these impulses, a good or selfless motive, or a not so good, a negative, a selfish motive. And as a spiritual being, purifying our hearts and minds to become spiritually rebirthed into the Baranash, new humanity, Messiah, we want to consciously choose the Yetzer HaTov over every impulse or inclination to do something selfish, just for me, against the greater good. It's warning us not to be a hypocrite, pardon me. Do not be a hypocrite. That's what this phrase is talking about. Don't pose to be something on the outside that you're not on the inside. Don't pose to be something on the outside that you're not inwardly. A lot of people, when they come to spiritual life, even sincerely, they go through this immature phase of being holier than thou art. Very sacred. I'm very holy. I'm on the way to enlightenment, man. But really on the inside, they're still full of negativity, selfishness, and require a lot of growth. Almost everybody, including myself, have gone to this stage. And it's a very painful awakening when you realize that your outside appearance to the world doesn't match your inner reality of your mind and your heart. And then when you realize that, and when you're humbled by God or by Mar Yeshua at that realization, then you can start to work to make the inner as the outer and the outer as the inner. To make yourself one consistent spiritual reality that is reflected well on the inside of you and the outside of you. You've made the two one. The two being the two yetzers or impulses. You made the Yetzer HaTov the only one. The two is Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara, both the good and evil inclinations of the heart. When you make the two one, you are choosing consciously only to act in thought, word, or deed from the Yetzer HaTov. And when you do this every day, consistently, this purifies the heart and readies you for spiritual rebirth. Make the above as the below. When you make the above as the below, then you shall attain the sovereignty. Most spiritual people know the formula of Hermes Trismegistus. As above, so below. As above, as below. And this matches Mar Yeshua's great teaching from the Lord's Prayer, the Master's Prayer. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And you could easily say the same thing. May thy will be done below as it is above. Same thing. And in a sense, this kind of is a continuation of making the inner outer and the outer inner, blah, blah, blah. All that kind of good stuff. This is the same thing. As God is served, praised, worshipped in heaven, may the same thing happen on earth. As above, so below. There's also inner realities to this, of raising and expanding consciousness, to let your consciousness expand from individual consciousness into universal consciousness. So we are consciously manifesting and embodying higher levels of soul and consciousness in our reality, in our personal existences, in our personal being. We are becoming a Christ in flesh. Christ means anointed, Messiah means anointed, Mashiach means anointed. Anointed of God means blessed of God, fulfilled by God, completed by God, and Jesus was not the only Christ or Messiah. He was a Christ. And his job through his Halakah, his outer, inner, and secret Halakah, was to raise us up to become a Christ also, to be a light for the world. In essence, inwardly, in the sense of consciousness, when we make the above as below, we are allowing the mind of Christ to overshadow our minds. We're letting all of our lesser tendencies, negative tendencies, selfish tendencies be sublimated to the mind of Christ. We're going from I consciousness to we consciousness. And also, ways of doing this is that you can invite your guardian angel or the angels to guide your thoughts, words, and deeds to higher levels of reality, to higher consciousness, to help you, to guide you, to inspire you to seek God more and more every day. Make the male and female a single unity. When you make the male and the female into a single unity, so that the male will not be merely masculine and the female merely feminine, then you shall attain the sovereignty. So what does this mean? Many people may interpret this differently. This is what I've learned and what arises in my intuition in addition to what I've been taught. So Masculine energy is positive energy, and feminine energy is negative energy. And negative does not mean bad or evil or anything like that. It's just like two poles on a battery. Two electric poles, two polarities, positive and negative. And this must be balanced within each of us. And really, this can only truly be done when you're meditating. When in deep meditation, these energies begin to flow throughout the body, through the energy channels that exist within us. Also, masculine energy is associated with reasoning and logic. So to be fully male did not mean, or to become male, or to become manly, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, a famous scripture from India. Krishna says to Arjuna, become manly. And he wasn't saying that. He was telling him actually to develop his masculine energy. Develop your reasoning and logic. Don't just be stuck in your emotions, but become a man, become manly. And a woman, many women are more manly than men. There are many women that have reasoning and logic in the ascendant of their mind. So again, this has nothing to do with outer gender, man and woman. This has to do with masculine and feminine principles that exist within both people to some degree, both sexes to some degree. So again, the masculine energy is associated with reasoning and logic. Feminine energy is associated with feeling and intuition. And we each have to look at ourselves and see which is weaker and which is stronger. If I have more feeling, if I'm more emotional and intuitive, then I need to develop the other half of my energy. I need to develop reasoning and logic. So you have to look at yourself and be honest with yourself. And wherever you are lacking in these two associated qualities for each energy, you need to work on what you don't have or what you have less of. You need to become balanced in your masculine and feminine energy in order to attain the sovereignty. We must learn to embody and blend both masculine and feminine energies in our life. How do we do this? I can remember whenever I was living with a spiritual friend of mine in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I have a lot of feminine qualities. I am much more female than I am male when you look at my astrological chart. I just am. I have a male body, and I'm a guy, but I have a lot of feminine energy in my body. This could be for lots of reasons. I was raised by all women, my mother and my grandmother, and I never had any kind of father figure. Not really, when I grew up. So it was only natural that I would embody more feminine qualities within my psyche. And I definitely lacked a lot of male qualities. I lacked reasoning and logic. I lacked any sense of repairing things, because men are supposed to be good at repairing things. And that's not true. Some of your husbands, boyfriends, and male friends, you may know they might not have any clue. So it's masculine energy. It's the power of reasoning and logic that wants to break something apart and put it back together again. So my spiritual friend, back in the day when I lived in Pittsburgh, she knew that I had more feminine qualities, which were very noble. But she realized that I lacked the masculine energy. So she would have me garden with her. She would have me make things. She built a deck on the back of her yard where I had to pick up a drill and measure wood and cut wood. And I was so out of my element and uncomfortable. But in the end, I really did feel internally that I'd grown. That my masculine energy and my feminine energy were more balanced. Some of you may know that I study ninjutsu. And ninjutsu may be interpreted as a very violent thing. It's not violent. In fact, the whole idea of ninjutsu, or true martial arts, is that you're learning it to protect yourself and those you love. Also to protect spiritual principles. Also to protect the earth. To protect your country. That's what ninjutsu is about. And whenever I had my last interview with my sensei in Kansas City, I went to visit her, and she said, she knows that I'm a priest, she knows that I teach yoga, she knows that I do astrology, that I do herbalism, all these things that are considered in today's world to have more feminine energy. And she asked me, what makes you different? What makes you not a stereotype, meaning being kind of like a feminine-like guy, which I'm proud of, actually. And I said, well, this, ninjutsu, learning to fight and stand up for myself and for others. And she said, that's right. She said, you should always use this art to encourage your masculine energy to become balanced with your feminine energy. So if you find that you are more feminine, you want to seek some things that are in the outside world that are considered masculine to do. And if you find yourself to be more masculine, whether man or woman, then you need to find more feminine activities to bring that feminine energy into your life. And you need to balance the two. So it's an outward work of balancing feminine and masculine energy activities, and also balancing that energy during meditation, which can really only be taught between a meditation teacher and a student, as two spiritual friends sitting together in the divine energy, the divine consciousness. When you truly blend your masculine and your feminine energy, you become androgynous. You become androgynous, which means neither male nor female. That is one of the ultimate goals of the Kima, or the resurrection. In the Kima, the resurrection, we will become like the angels, more Yeshua says. And that is an androgynous being, because angels are androgynous, neither male nor female. However, you should definitely note that humans do not become angels. Oftentimes you'll hear, oh, my dad died and now he's an angel in heaven. Your dad might be a great saint, but he's not an angel. Angels and humans are two separate emanations from Godhead. So they're not the same. So Mar Yeshua says in the Kima, in the resurrection, we will become like the angels, meaning we'll have an androgynous being. So we have the basar, which is the body of flesh. We have the nefesh, which is the astral or personality body. And that astral body, which is called nefesh, it dies after 40 days. You experience a second death after physical death, in which your personality of this incarnation dissolves. And then there's the lower soul, so to speak, which is called neshima. That neshima does not have gender. And if you continue on the way up and you begin to experience higher levels of soul, which we talk about in our teachings, then eventually you experience yourself as an androgynous being. You can maintain your personality from the last lifetime when you perfected yourself, but you'll no longer be identified necessarily as a male or a female. You'll be androgynous because in life, in the body, you balance the masculine and feminine energies. So you've essentially married yourself. One traditional spiritual explanation for marriage is that you learn from your partner, assuming that you are a man that marries a woman, or you are a woman that marries a man. You're really seeking the opposite energy so you can balance your masculine and feminine energies. That's how it's always been viewed in ancient India, and I'm sure Mar Yeshua was very aware of this too. At the highest level of pre-Kabbalistic constitution is called Yahida. It is the feminine higher soul. Whether you have a male body or a female body in this life, everybody has Yahida. Everybody's highest soul is feminine in relationship to the one masculine positive being, which is Godhead or Yahid. So the ultimate marriage from a pre-Kabbalistic and Kabbalistic thought is the union of Yahid, our highest aspect or attribute of our soul, with Yahid, Godhead. So this is also on the highest level of reality, how you make the female and the male a single unity, is that you merge Yahida with Yahid. Very esoteric, and how that would be done would be through secret Halakah. So this is where inner Halakah mixes with secret Halakah. Make human eyes to serve as God's eye. When you make human eyes to serve as God's eye, then you shall attain the sovereignty. Human eyes only look outward. We're stuck in our outward reality. Most of us have no idea what is within. The Malkuth of heaven is within. But in order to attain that, you have to develop a divine eye that looks inward. The single eye of the heart, as it is said in our liturgy. Human eyes see division and faults in others. We usually see things as different from us or separate from us, and we tend to see the faults in others even unwillingly. Not always with malicious intent, but even unwillingly, we find ourselves judging others and their actions. The divine eye only sees unity throughout all of creation, all that is emanated, and it only sees the goodness in others. As my spiritual master always says, even a broken watch will tell the right time twice a day. Even a broken watch will tell the right time twice a day. So we should always seek to see the goodness in others and encourage that one speck of goodness, if that's all that somebody truly has. Encourage and comment on that to bring it out and help them to grow it and express it more. My teacher always said, of all the different virtues, love, patience, tolerance, etc., if you really focus on one, if you only have one out of the many, and you truly focus on that, all others will develop from that, and you will be liberated. So focus on whatever's in your own heart, because likewise we often give ourselves big guilt trips. We divide ourselves, we see ourselves as separate from God. Oftentimes we'll see our own faults. So as the outer reality is, so is the inner. We have to see the union with God of both our soul and everybody else's souls, and see our own goodness. Encourage our own goodness. Even if we have only one good quality, fully focus on that and express it. And the other qualities will have to emerge. If you reflect on this, you'll see that it's absolutely true. To make human eyes to serve as God's eye, this also refers to the development of intuition. It may refer to the prophecy, the gift of prophecy, and to clairvoyant skills which naturally and spontaneously arise in a perfected saint or tzaddik. A human hand to serve as God's hand. When you make a human hand to serve as God's hand, then you shall attain the sovereignty. Human hands reach out to grasp momentary pleasures. I want to make myself comfortable. What can I do? What can I get? What can I attain that will make me comfortable? Me. That's what human hands do. Grasp onto money, grasp onto possessions, grasp onto what's mine. God's hand serves the poor and vulnerable. So when we begin focusing on selfless service, on spiritual service to those that are vulnerable in our communities, then a human hand becomes God's hand. God has no other eyes, ears, hands, or feet but our own. You are God's eyes, God's ears, God's hands, God's feet. God has no other physical body but our own. This may also refer to the gift of divine healing, the perfection of the outer Halakah of compassionate works is also what this refers to. When we truly fulfill and act in a daily way to serve others through compassionate actions, through compassionate words, through compassionate thoughts and prayers. That is when you make God's hand manifest out of two human hands. A human foot to serve as God's foot. When you make a human foot to serve as God's foot, then you shall attain the sovereignty, the Malkuth. Human feet tend to move toward fulfillment of pleasures, or run away from pain or displeasure. God's foot, or God's feet, move us towards the beauty of nature, churches, temples, or sacred gathering places, towards those in need of selfless service, to assuage their suffering, if only for a moment. If you can take away somebody's pain or suffering, even for a moment, then you've done your worship of God for that day. Selfless service is the true worship of God. Never forget it. Compassion is the beginning and the culmination of the spiritual path. That is what my master taught me. Move through the world as a child of God. What does a true child of God do? How does a true child of God act? How does a true child of God think, talk? Reflect on this and be that. Be the example that you want to see in the world. You are the light of the world. May your light shine before all, that they may see the good that you do and give glory to God, to the Abba. A human image to serve as the divine image. When you make a human image to serve as the divine image, then you shall attain the sovereignty, the Malkuth. The image of God within us is pure goodness, pure consciousness, purity itself. When this image is installed within us at the time of our emanation into being, we are also given two inclinations or impulses that we talked about earlier. The Yetzer HaTov, good or godly inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, evil or selfish, all too human inclination. The human image is the admixture of both the good and the evil inclinations, producing mixed results in the world. Most people on the planet are not saints, and most are not devils. Almost all humans are a healthy mixture of both Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara, good and evil inclinations. We act from both erratically, unpredictably, throughout our days, months, years, and life. Look at yourself, and you'll see it true. The divine image is realized and intuited within the heart when the Yetzer Hara is eliminated, or at least greatly subjugated, and when the human soul expresses only from the Yetzer HaTov. This is when Malkuth, or sovereignty, is attained by the disciple of Mar Yeshua, and when they become spiritually born from the old Adam to the new Adam, the new humanity, the Baranash, corporate Messiah, the communion of saints. It is a divine, inner, and secret, or hidden reality within the liberated soul. And I use liberated. We must become liberated from self-incurred debt or sin to God, to humanity, to the earth. We owe so much to the earth, to our parents, to our friends, to our countries. We can never repay that debt except by fully transforming ourselves, as described here in the Gospel of Thomas. Don't forget that Yeshua means liberation or liberator. It is Mar Yeshua the liberator who offers the teachings that lead to soul liberation through his outer, inner, and secret Halakah. May Mar Yeshua bless us all with liberation, pure consciousness, pure love, and peace. To live the message of Logian 22b of Gospel of Thomas, one must meditate in new contemplation daily. An internal review of one's actions is contemplation. Let us conclude by reading this verse one more time. His disciples asked, "Then shall we, being spiritually newly begotten ones, attain the sovereignty, Malkuth?" Yeshua replied, "When you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make the male and female into a single unity, so that the male will not be merely masculine, and the female merely feminine, and when you make human eyes to serve as God's eye, and a human hand to serve as God's hand, and a human foot to serve as God's foot, and a human image to serve as the divine image, then you shall attain the sovereignty, the Malkuth of God, the Malkuth of heaven, which is within Eknath, within your heart. Amen. Amen.